Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Happy Mental Health Monday, everybody, and welcome to the Embrace Mental Health podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey, and today I've got my co-host, Wesley, with me. Hello, Wesley.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here.
And not only is it Mental Health Monday, but it is March Madness time, which is why I'm in my full-out Michigan State gear. We are recording this on the day of their first game, so in an hour, roughly an hour, their game starts. So in roughly 3 hours, I might need some extra self-care, which is what our topic is for today. But
very appropriate.
Yep, pulling out the stops, hoping it helps. But because while, I am actually one of those really superstitious sports fans. So some people might have just been like, oh man, I thought she had credible things to say, but now I know she's nuts. So
I enjoy sports, but I enjoy watching Kelsey watch sports more.
I do have a reputation in many places for my sports watching craziness, but yep.
Yeah, Marissa and I should have a date just to come watch you watch a MSU game.
That'd be so funny. Like the entertainment. You can either have if you like sports, you can watch the sports, or if you think it's entertaining to watch people act nuts, then come watch me watch basketball.
Yeah, people watching is a legitimate hobby.
Yep, exactly. All right. So as I briefly mentioned, today's topic is self-care. And we'll kind of dive into all sorts of different aspects of what that is, looks like, pluses and even some, minuses or things to kind of watch out for. But yeah, so normally I don't feel like our intro questions are quite this on the nose, but I don't know. It feels like this is an opportunity to do that. So
yeah,
our intro question.
I feel like a lot of our self-care questions are kind of fun and silly, which is great sometimes, but nice to do something, I don't know, productive and relevant once in a while too, I guess.
Exactly. So the question is, what's one form of self-care you do regularly? What's one that you would like to do more? And then what's one that sounds just awful to you? Like some people really enjoy this type of self-care, but you're like, that would be the opposite for me. That would be self-torture. So
yes. Yeah, well, I'll go first. One form of self-care you do regularly. I was thinking about this, and as those who have heard podcast episodes I've been on in the past know, this is maybe one of the busier seasons of my life. I kind of hope it is. And so, implementing like straight up self-care, it's tough. And I'm into mindfulness and meditation and stuff like that. And I have not really come across anybody. I'm sure that they're out there, but I haven't come across anybody who has like a daily meditation practice of like 20 or 30 minutes every single day who has little kids. I just feel like this is kind of a season that I'm allowed to skip. Even though, I do implement these kinds of things in my life in other ways, I do not have a daily practice. So I guess I'll go ahead and say that that's my one that I would like to do more, because I feel like there's ways that I could increase that, and it helps so much. And I always miss it when I go an extended period of time without actually sitting and meditating and just noticing my thoughts and letting them go and just doing that whole practice. So that was the second part first. But my first part is it is kind of a productive self-care, which feels like cheating, but I'm going to say that it's not, because sometimes that's all we got. And so that would be really playing with my kids. I love it. I like to be silly. I've had family members comment on how, I come across as this kind of like somewhat stoic, quiet, I don't know, reflective kind of person. But then when I'm with my kids, I seem kind of childlike. And that part is very much in there. It's just that it doesn't express when I'm around a bunch of serious adults. And so that's really good. And I was mentioning to Kelsey before the episode that having kids is kind of like having a dog in that way, that it, in order to be a good dog owner, you have to go for walks sometimes. And I always love when my clients are dog owners, because I at least know that they're probably going on walks every 2-3 days or so, maybe. Having being a good parent is the same way. Like you have to be silly and play with your kids and kind kind of enter that headspace once in a while, which is good for us. And I think to add on to that, sometimes I do tell my kids no, and that's a way that I practice self-care, or I would say even more, telling my kids to wait a second. This is something I'm always kind of shocked when I hear parents of little kids, of older kids or whatever, they feel like they're always at their kids' beck and call, whether it's for something serious or something just kind of random. And so it's like, you can tell your kids to hang on a second, like, let me finish what I'm doing and then I'll get to it. And for some people that could be quite helpful. So there's a little bit of advice for any overwhelmed parents out there, just in case you're not implementing that. But I do that. Like, here, let me finish making my coffee, finish doing the dishes or whatever, and then I'll come play with monster trucks. That's one way that I do it. So the last part, what sounds awful to me, again, something I think I'm telling myself is a season of life thing. I enjoy exercise in basically all of its forms, honestly. I like lifting weights. I like running. I love playing sports. And I do be active whenever I do be active. I do be active. I am active. Whenever I see an opportunity, we take our kids to a gymnastics place, and I like to jump around and climb and be involved in those kinds of ways. So, but again, I don't exercise on a regular basis, certainly not on a daily basis, like an actual, here's my 30 minutes of exercise in the morning. My kids are early risers. And so in order to do that, I would have to stuff it in at the end of the day right before bed, which I do not want to do, because then you got to calm down and that would affect my sleep, I think. And then I really would beginning of the day is my prime time for exercising, but that would mean getting up well before 6 o'clock every single day. And I'm not willing to make that sacrifice. So that at this time sounds awful to me.
Yes. So for me, one that I would say that I pretty consistently do, but I do think is a helpful reset for me. Like Wes, I feel like I'm in a extremely busy point of life, and every single time I'm like, well, I think it'll slow down after this is completed, and then that gets completed, and I'm like, oh, but actually that still got filled up. So yeah, still learning balance. But anyway, something that I'd say that I do pretty frequently that is self-care for me. I think I've talked before about how I prefer to either be standing and moving or laying down. I'm not I don't really enjoy sitting. So one thing I do pretty frequently is at the end of the day, I will spend at least some time lounging on the couch and decompressing that way. And yeah, just kind of having a chance to kind of decompress a little bit, disconnect, and let my mind kind of let its guard down a little bit and kind of relax. And that's always been helpful for me. One that I would like to do more, I would like to take my dog on more walks. And I'm sure she's barking somewhere in the background saying, I would like that too, because she absolutely loves going on walks. But even just hiking, especially, I really enjoy walking in beautiful areas. And I feel like hiking is a good, you can get a good workout in, but you don't have to feel like you're strenuously working super hard. So it can be more of a relaxing form of exercise. I mean, depending on the hike, obviously, if you're hiking in the Rocky Mountains, it might be a little bit more intensive, but regardless.
It's part of the fun though, or at least it can be for some of us. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So would like to do some more of that. Now that, I don't know, I say it's starting to thaw, but today is a really cold day in Michigan, but
it's cold.
Yeah. But now that we're starting to get towards the part of the year where the weather will warm up, maybe I'll make that a little bit more of a practice. And then one that probably would light up a lot of people's eyes, but just, I don't know, it's just not my thing, but would be going to a coffee shop or a library or something like that and just sitting and reading all day. I know a lot of people, that sounds like ultimate self-care, perfection. Honestly, 3 of my closest friends are all just avid readers, and they, a perfect weekend getaway for them would be to just go somewhere and read all weekend. And, I can do it for maybe, an hour, maybe 2, but after that, it's just, I wish I liked reading, but I just don't really find it that relaxing, I guess. It's a little bit, I'm not a great reader, and so I think it's a little bit frustrating and have a hard time concentrating or whatever it is. But yep, just a lot of people would really enjoy kind of getting away and just reading, and that is just, it's not my self-care thing and not really how I would choose to spend my time to try and relax and recuperate. So
Once again, Kelsey, we are the same person. I like knowledge, and I like stories. Yeah, all the things that are contained within books. But yeah, reading is a chore for me, honestly. Like I do it because I have to. I do it as something productive. Even audiobooks. I've been listening to audiobooks, but like that's in place of podcasts. Ironically, here we are recording a podcast, not an audiobook. But it's like the only way that I can get it in. And even then it's like, okay, I'll do this because it's good for me. Um, so yeah, that is, I consume, I think valuable knowledge in other ways. I am sort of a lifelong learner, but yeah, sitting down with a book, be it physical or on the Kindle. I like reading out loud with my wife or with my kids because there's that social element, and I like doing like voices for the stories and everything like that. But no, I'm totally with you, and I'm ashamed to admit it sometimes because I feel like I should like reading, but nope. I have more fun playing a video game, watching a movie. I'm just gonna do that instead for self-care. I do enjoy making reading lists, actually. I Isn't that funny? It's like I've got like 105 books or so that, boy, it would be so great for me to read those, and I will probably read about 10% of them ever.
yes, exactly. There are so many books that I would love to read, and I have like bookshelves that have books that I'm like, yep, okay, someday I want to read that, but I just like, it's just maybe by the time I die, I could finish all of the books that I want to read right now, but it's just, yeah, it's just not. I think sometimes too, like people just assume that if you don't like reading, it's because you're not an intellectual, and that's not true. Like I love knowledge, like you said, and I love intellectually stimulating conversations and podcasts and documentaries, etc. But yeah, just reading is not my favorite way to gather information. So, but yeah, so for all our readers out there, hope you have some good time reading. But Wesley and I will be skipping that self care retreat. I don't know, maybe it's like an introvert extrovert thing, because I think Wesley and I are both extroverts. But anyway, okay. So after we've talked about self care, we'll really dive into what exactly it means and what the different forms of it can look like and what some people kind of seem to think it means, but that perhaps it doesn't actually mean. But yeah, or some dangers that can get involved with your understanding of health, not healthcare. That's a whole different topic, but
Yeah.
self-care. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there such a thing as too much self-care? That's one of the questions that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of get into what is self-care, self-care I feel like has gotten to be kind of one of those like sexy terms in the last, I feel like especially 5 years. I don't know. I don't think it's just been there. I can't remember distinctively. I'm sure I remember self-care being talked about like in college and stuff too. But I saw somewhere that the like Google searches for self-care has quadrupled since 2018. So it's definitely something that like has grown and gotten rather popular of an idea. But
Yeah, it definitely started getting popular prior to the 2020 pandemic. And then, of course, once we got to the pandemic, it just, it added a truckload of gasoline to the fire.
yeah, yeah, exactly. With combination of isolation and then that creating more opportunities for self-care for a lot of people, but also a lot of need for self-care for a lot of people. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think it became so ubiquitous that it was kind of diluted. Like it did very quickly, at least I observed, get to the point where it's like, are we still talking about self-care here? You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means, to quote the Princess Bride.
Yes. Classic.
Yeah.
So to give sort of a little bit more of a concrete definition to it, according to Everyday Health, their definition of self-care is that self-care is anything you do to take care of yourself so you can stay physically, mentally, and emotionally well. And one distinction that I've seen a lot of different places make is that it is not synonymous with self-indulgence or selfishness. And I think sometimes it can turn into that people can put the self-care label on whatever it is they want to do, but we'll kind of dive into that a little bit later too. but at least how I kind of see it is self-care is sort of that refilling of your bucket. And so like you're expending energy, you're expending, you know, pieces of yourself. What's a better way of saying that?
Yeah, we're giving, we're expressing our energies into the world, we're pouring ourselves out,
Hmm.
and that's a good thing. Giving of ourselves and doing work, creating. This is
Yeah.
all part of being human, but we also can't do that nonstop. One of my favorite practices and concepts from the Judeo-Christian tradition is one of the most ignored, and that is Sabbath. At least in Christianity, it's mostly ignored. I think Jews tend to take it much more seriously. But and Sabbath, of course, not just being the day that you go to church, which seems to be the most popular definition, at least in American Christianity, but Sabbath day coming from the story of creation in the beginning of the scriptures, where God makes stuff over the first 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rests. And it's like, why the heck does a God need to rest? But that's a very intentional part of the story. And it does create like a 6-in-1 rhythm that I think works really well for us. In fact, I would say that is another area of self-care that we try to implement, not really from a religious standpoint, but just we try to have what we call a do nothing day in our household, at least once, one of the weekend days, either Saturday or Sunday, sometimes
Yeah.
Friday, because I don't work Fridays. And it's not always like literally do nothing day. Sometimes it is. We don't go anywhere. We might step outside for 30 minutes, but that's it. But a lot of times too, it's like we just do the stuff that we want to do, the fun stuff. There's no obligation. We could totally just not go and that would be fine, but we want to do it. Those are the restorative things that refill us to continue living our lives the rest of the time. And if we're in a do nothing place 7 days a week, that is equally a problem.
Yeah.
We need that rhythm of mostly doing and creating and all these kinds of things and giving, but not all the time. We need that rest, at least
Yeah.
pretty regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so yeah, it's kind of that refilling of you've been kind of pouring out. So then self-care, I think, is sort of that, okay, what are some things that we can do to kind of restore, get back to a little bit more of a balance, or, take some time to make sure that we are doing things that make us healthy and not just always concentrating on what we can do to make everyone else healthy or et cetera. Can
Yeah,
look different ways, but yeah.
I think to pick this apart a little further and it kind of makes it more complicated, we have to have some discernment, which again, we'll continue to get into. But what is self-care for one person is not for another person.
Yeah.
And in fact, what is self-care for me in this moment, in another moment may actually not be self-care.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to eat really healthy and it's punchki day and I want to get a punchki, and it's just delicious and I just enjoy it and I continue to try to eat healthy the rest of the time, that punchki was self-care for me that day. But if I just kind of feel like a slob and I feel bad about myself, and I think we all have those days sometimes, and I just kind of like eat a donut to reinforce how terrible I am, that is not self-care, even though it's the same exact act for the same
Yeah.
person. So
Yeah.
mindset has a lot to do with it in context.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think along those lines, I think, some of the ways that it's gotten warped a little bit is that I do think there is almost a little bit of a treat yourself kind of
Hmm.
idea with it. Like, okay, self-care is self-indulgence and like
Whatever
doing
feels good,
whatever,
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever feels good. Yep, like exactly. Like I need some self-care, so I'm going to continuously spend money on things and then feel worse later because all of a sudden my bank account is not in great shape. And so kind of, yeah. And there can be aspects of it where sometimes it is self-care to treat yourself a little bit. But if I think sometimes it gets stuck in that. That's what self-care is entirely, yeah, doing whatever feels good in the moment or
Yeah, that's
whatever.
not
And
quite right.
that's, yeah,
That's not
exactly.
restorative. That's breaking us down just as much as overworking would be.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so self-care can take a wide variety of forms. Um, it can look like some of the, basics of hygiene. I remember when I was in college freshman year, who was it? There was a speaker who came in just to talk to the freshman class. There was like a freshman class program that was just for freshmen, just kind of getting acclimated to college life and adulthood and all these kinds of things. And the speaker came in, and he mentioned hygiene a lot, as like to the point where it was kind of a joke. He's like, and good hygiene. Don't forget good hygiene, kind of a thing. But it's funny that he did that because it stuck with me. Because honestly, looking back to my college days, my hygiene was not up to par, and a lot of college students. I'm sure that I was not alone in that room, and it's gotten a lot better, a lot more important. And I feel good when I have my nails clipped, and when I've showered in the last couple days, and when I dress in a way in well-fitting clothes, like these kinds of things. Makes a big difference. Oh, he was talking about relationships, and he was saying that like as you get older, good hygiene eventually emerges as the most important attribute, which I love. um, so anyway, just to share that little moment of joy with you. But yeah, so I mean, seriously, hygiene. And as I've said before, I work with a lot of grieving people. And in those first weeks, I tell people, honestly, getting enough to eat, getting enough to sleep, showering at least 2-3 times a week if you can, or taking a bath, whatever you do. This stuff is critical, and it can be easy to overlook sometimes. So
Yeah.
just because it's kind of a given for many of us doesn't mean that we can overlook it. Nutrition, as I said before, eating healthy. We all know that, especially, I've been in a place where I was not eating healthy on a regular basis. And whenever I would just have like some raw vegetables, boy, did that feel good. I've seen memes about like, you eat a banana or you eat a piece of fruit, and it's just a picture of somebody with like sunshine on them and wind blowing in their hair. It's just like, really in health nirvana or something like that. But it does make us feel good, as we all know. And so that's one of those things I found that really you just have to make it a habit. You just have to keep at it and make it a habit. And also to allow yourself to cheat once in a while and not get too legalistic about it. But
Yeah.
and yeah, just general physical health. Obviously, exercise is, I'm sure, one of those things we could all be doing more of. There's the rare person out there who should exercise a little bit less, but let's be honest, that's less than 5% of us easily. So yeah, coping skills. I actually thought about mentioning this as well with the intro question, because I am in a stressful season of life. And I was talking with my therapist about this, about how I'm pretty proud of the way that I'm handling a lot of things. And I think that practicing what I often preach to clients for dealing with stress has been so critical. One of the most powerful techniques is muscle regulation, or ultimately self-regulation. You're regulating your whole nervous system. So to make it extremely brief, we're all encountering triggers throughout our lives of things that cause us undue stress, where we feel threatened, and we're not actually in a threatening situation. It's just a part of being a human being. And it's how we're designed. It's got us this far as a species. And so regulating our muscles, keeping our bodies relaxed, sends a message to our brain that we're not in danger, and it decreases the amount of stress and anxiety that we feel. And I do find myself doing that all throughout the day, and it makes a huge difference. I think that I'm sure there's a lot of people doing it subconsciously, but I've got to think that those people out there who are like just crazy successful CEOs who have a decent family life or whatever, those people who it's like, how in the world do they do it all? They have to be doing this. They have to. It's one of those, like, I think, secrets that shouldn't be a secret.
Yeah.
So
I would say, I think a lot of times the emphasis of self-care tends to be on emotional self-care. But I think it is important to point out, like, yeah, things like hygiene are self-care. And I think that's something even I forget from time to time. But that should be, honestly, it's one of my first indicators of, ooh, I need to take a little bit more time and kind of refill a little bit. Because when I realize, like, oh, I'm not doing my full face washing routine very frequently, or I'm not doing like my full dental routine or anything, like some of those types of things. And I'm like, okay, that's an indication to me that I'm starting to kind of let my self-care slip a little bit, is almost more of the physical. And so, we talk a lot about how there's a mind-body connection. And really, I think self-care is kind of looking at all the different aspects of yourself. It's not just your emotional self, but it's, your mind, your body, your heart, your soul, and kind of looking into those. And sometimes, you might say, well, I need some self-care, so it's more self-care for me to keep laying on the couch instead of going and showering right now. And it's like, actually, the part of you that needs to be cared for is the showering. And so sometimes you even have competing areas that like, oh, this both could be self-care, but one is more important in the moment, or it's kind of complicated, but at the same time, like we said, just about anything could be self-care depending on what your needs are in the moment. But yeah.
Yeah, got to keep the big picture and the long game in mind. Like, which one tomorrow morning will I be glad that I did?
Yeah.
Is a question I find myself asking pretty often.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'll always probably carry with me is just like it was like a tweet years ago that I came across. It was like, I thought that I was having a bad day. And then around dinner time, I realized that my pants were just on too tight. um, that's so true. Like I have no shame in just with my body type. Like I need my belt to be at a different setting when I'm standing versus when I'm sitting in order to be comfortable and keep my pants where they should be. And so I will like adjust my belt one notch kind of multiple times a day. And I've just kind of let that be like, this is a normal and okay and good thing for me. So yeah, those kind of simple physical things I think are often taken for granted. So
Oh,
yeah. I feel like this next point that we have here, Kelsey, about why is it important, we've already been hitting on quite a bit of it.
yeah.
But I do want to jump ahead here to just that self-care can help us to address unmet needs and promote overall better holistic health and better relationships. And this is a huge piece of self-care I think that many of us are familiar with, but some of us are not, that taking care of ourselves is better for the people around us as well. The people in my life, they need me to be at my best. Or maybe they don't need me to, but it sure helps.
Yeah.
I want to be the best version of Wesley that I can be for my clients, for my family, for the strangers who I meet, for the other drivers on the road.
Yeah.
um, and so that is one area where we can definitively say that true self-care is not a selfish thing. If you think that we're saying the word self here too often, the reality is that we're all just kind of stuck in these bodies and these individual, I don't know, beings that we are. And that's where our control kind of begins and ends. And so nobody can take care of myself but me. And we all know what it's like to be around physically, emotionally, mentally unhealthy people and how they can be a drain on us. And we don't want to be that person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, there are definitely people out there who feel, probably some of them have learned through their childhood that your needs are secondary, or honestly, not even secondary, just like lowest priority. And taking care of your own needs is selfish. And, I know a number of people in my life who just kind of feel that way. And it's always so sad to me because, like, what I think everyone needs to hear, but especially those people, is your needs matter. And so, anybody, if you're constantly pouring out but not refilling, it's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to health problems or exhaustion or mental breakdown or resentment. At some point or another, if you are constantly putting out, but you are not taking the time to kind of refill and take care of yourself, meet your needs, you're going to be operating from a lower capacity. And so, it's kind of like, I mean, I don't know, this analogy isn't perfect, but it's kind of like if you just constantly kept your iPhone battery at 50%, and it's like, oh, it slipped a little bit, so I'll plug it in for 3 minutes just to get it back to 50%. But then now the problem is that phones still work fine at 50% capacity, but we human beings are not made by Apple, thank God. And so we don't operate as well from 50%, And so taking the time to recharge sometimes and fill up again so that we are operating from a better capacity, because not only do your needs matter, but when your needs are more sufficiently met, then you're able to be a better person to the people around you. And so,
Yes. Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say. I think about there's one person I have known before. We've lost touch over time, but they're coming to mind. And this person is to me like the epitome of the word meek. They're very just super duper nice and well-meaning and just like you were describing, Kelsey, really puts their needs at the bottom of the ladder, not even really on the ladder, and
Yeah.
just, oh, I don't want to bother you, I don't want to get in your way, and apologizing when it's like, what in the world are you even apologizing for? There's nothing to apologize for here. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine, is when people just like, I'll knock something over and they'll say, I'm sorry. And it's like, stop, no.
Right.
uh, which I know it's not their fault. They're conditioned to be that way. But anyway, but this person, again, very nice, but also exhausting to be around. It's like you walk away from this person and it's just like, ooh, they're so nice, and yet I find myself wanting to avoid them. And so clearly, this approach to life, and there is an unhealthy selflessness that we can live with.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, have you ever seen The Good Place?
I've seen like a couple episodes. It's one of those things I just can't get into TV shows because of
Yeah.
time. But if I did, that would be one I would look into. Yeah.
Yeah, the character Chidi on there, like, spoiler alert. So if anybody's planning on in the near future watching The Good Place, it turns out the reason that he is in hell is because he was trying so hard to be good and perfect and not do anything wrong that he just drove everyone crazy around him. Like, that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. I think most of us have met that person. Yeah, that's funny.
Yep.
So true. Very clever to put that in there.
Hmm.
So yeah, and so for those out there who are listening to this, and you identify as somebody who has mental health challenges, you might say, I have a mental illness. A lot of times, our mental health can be exhausting, and it can be easy to let things that are good for us go to the wayside. It's like, I'm just so drained by my depression. I'm overwhelmed by my anxiety that I just don't have the energy to even do this thing that would be good for me. But again, we all know, not only from what we've been told, but also from practice, that doing these things that are truly self-care, it makes everything else in our lives easier and better, and makes our day a little bit brighter. And so it does take some kind of, we talk about short-term and long-term. It does take a little effort sometimes, honestly. Sometimes it takes immense effort in the short term to get up and go shower for some of us, really, depending on where we're at in our lives. And yet, that the rest of that day, and maybe even the next day, you're going to feel a lot better for it. And so to just prioritize those things that have a lasting positive effect for you, those are the things that are worth fighting for. And for those of us who are trying to support mentally ill folks in our lives, like I was describing before, they need you to be at your best. And so giving to them, and worrying about them, and fussing over them, that is well-meaning probably, but that's not what's best for them. There's only so much that you can do for them. And at the end of the day, no one can take care of yourself but you.
Exactly. Yeah. So wherever you fall in that spectrum, understanding that your needs matter, and your needs matter not only for your health, but also, in a sense, for the health of the people around you too, of being able to be your best self and have that capacity for others too. Because especially I've seen people, or honestly, even some people who have had to be my friend in times where I've been in a really low place, and I'm a little bit more, I don't want to say exhausting to be around, because that's a little bit harsh, but like, where it's not just hanging out with me and it's fun. It's like, oh, there's a lot extra care that is required right now.
Yeah, I'm going to need to spend some time listening to Kelsey vent about something, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Taking care of yourself and making sure that you're not just completely engulfed in that, because it's really difficult, because it's complicated, and it's not always, it's often not a quick fix either. And so taking that time to take care of yourself and get outside of it a little bit sometimes, and remember that you shouldn't be the only support for a person either. Like, it should be a team effort as much as possible. But the more that you can keep your health in as optimum of a place as you can, that gives you a greater capacity to extend that patience and that understanding and the compassion for your loved ones. Because I think a lot of times when those things start to fail, it's because you're so drained. And, all of us know, if I'm tired, I'm much less likely to be patient, or have a harder time being compassionate if I'm really stressed out. And so, finding those ways to try and maintain as much balance is really important for a loved one. So, yeah.
Yeah, when we're running on empty, we really need to say no to people a lot
Hmm.
more often, because we're just not in a place to be able to handle that. And I don't know about you, but I want to be that kind of reliable, stable person for my friends and family uh, when it's possible to do so. Again, I'm not going to be able to be that 24/7, 365, but it's nice when I can be. It feels good, and it benefits them as well. So, gotta keep keep up my training, keep up my self care for those times. Mhm. So, Kelsey, you wrote down a just a list of things I imagine off the top of your head of what self care actually looks like. But I think it's worth reading through this because there might be something that jumps out to someone that's like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while, or maybe I should do that. I let that fall to the wayside. I've always wanted to do that, or have been wanting to for a while. So, taking a nap, hiking, journaling, showering, enjoying favorite things, getting a vaccine, turning off the TV, turning on the TV, again, depending on who you are and where you're at, taking vitamins, saying no, saying yes. I think about that Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man, and all the interesting things that come about when he says yes to everything.
Yep.
But of course, we know that can get us into trouble too. Uh, Putting your phone away, praying, meditating, reading, not for you and me, Kelsey, but for
Yeah.
someone out there, pick up a book. Yeah. Touching grass, as they say. I mean, that's when I know we did an episode recently on suicide, and when I'm doing a suicide safety plan with people, I pretty much always try to leap at when they come up with like, what are some things you could do to distract yourself? If it involves nature and if it involves social interaction, I'm always like, yes, 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 please write that down, because those things are almost always good for us, especially if
Yeah.
it's with social people, socializing with people who do fill us and make us feel better to be with them. And so one more point here that I wrote down, I want to make sure and say, is make sure that it's practical and doesn't add too much stress. I know one of the reasons that I cringe when people start talking about self-care is because it actually just becomes a to-do list sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you need to commit to doing this for yourself and that for yourself and make this a practice. And it's like, no, this is stressing me out. I can't add to this. So whenever I bring up self-care with clients, or on the occasion I'll bring it up with a loved one, I always try to make sure that it's something they're gonna want to do it, and it's gonna be practical for them to do it. It really truly is only gonna take 10 minutes or something like that. And if it's becoming a to-do list, you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I can easily see how that becomes yeah, it's like, okay, I need to up my self-care. So now I'm gonna type A this and like
Yeah.
make this regiment, and then all of a sudden I'm burned out because I'm self-caring so hard.
Right.
Like,
You've just added another
yeah.
part-time job to your life. Congratulations. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say either something that you can do 5 to 10 minutes a day, or like something that you can do for an hour or two weekly or monthly or something like that. Like that, yeah, is going to be sustainable because, yeah.
Or that you can do a few seconds a day, 30 times a day, like adjust your belt when you sit down.
Yeah, exactly. It is funny, like the number. Well, I should have added that to the list. Adjusting your belt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, obviously. Everyone always
Right.
talks about that one. How did you miss it? Yeah.
My bad. But yeah, sometimes it's just the simple little things that can make a difference. But
But in all seriousness, I do want to just say that I think that if I look at the self-care in my life, it sometimes is like those split second little things that I just kind of made a habit. Like, I mean, for all of us, it's for many of us anyway, hopefully many of us, it's like you put your deodorant on before you put your shirt on or whatever. It's like, or just things that you do throughout the day to make, or like that muscle regulation thing that I talked about. It's just like these things that over time we keep them in mind, and if you can make them a habit and make them go on autopilot, it really smooths everything else out. So not to take
yeah,
that for granted. It's nice when it doesn't have to be a thing even that you set aside time to do, but you just kind of incorporate it into your daily life as you go about your day.
yeah, yeah. So to kind of give some people a little bit of an idea of like maybe a way that you could start to practice self-care either for the first time or maybe just a little bit differently than what you have been so far. Um, this would kind of be my suggestion for how to kind of go towards figuring out what you need for self-care. And that would be to kind of just periodically, now whether this is, weekly, I don't necessarily see this as being a weekly thing, but it could be. I would guess maybe either monthly or like once every 3 months or something, like maybe seasonally.
Mhm.
But I used to do this more frequently, and now that we're talking about it, I'll have to look it up and kind of start doing this again. But It's just kind of periodically take inventory of the different areas of your life. So physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, all the different aspects of ourselves. And other people might have, other categories that they would add or subtract to that list. But just kind of take an inventory of those areas and think about, what is my level of health in each of these areas, and what are areas of need in each of these areas. And so I think that can be a helpful way of understanding, like, okay, yeah, like, I think what I did before, I had just like a little inventory sheet that had all these different areas. And it was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how healthy are you feeling in these areas? Or I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but just, if that's easy to kind of come up with a scale of 1 to 10, or whatever it is, that kind of how you measure how healthy you're feeling in all of these areas. But also, yeah, kind of thinking, okay, what's going well in this area? And then also, what are some areas of need? And then kind of taking some of those areas where you're like, I'm not feeling like this area doesn't seem to be as healthy as usual, or as robust or fulfilling as usual. And so, kind of looking at those and then trying to think of, like we said, some specific but practical ways that you can kind of address those. And like we said, this doesn't need to be some sort of thing. You don't need to come up with a daily calendar of, this doesn't need to be stressful. This can be just like, okay, yeah, I want to keep in mind that I would like to start practicing doing this a little bit more. But I kind of areas of, what are ways you can strike a better balance within these areas? What are ways that you can make these areas of your life more fulfilling and joyful? And just promoting health and happiness. And like, absolutely, we encourage people to be creative in this. I think sometimes we get stuck in what is often referred to as these things, like, I don't know, like journaling. Everyone, I mean, I'm a big proponent of journaling, but like, you can get creative. You can think of different ways, or ways that you're going to be, because I know, like Wesley's talked about, he doesn't necessarily like journaling. And
Yeah.
so finding different ways of kind of looking at that are creative.
Yeah,
And then,
well, just to give the example from for me, it's like I do find it helpful to write things down or to make lists or to draw illustrations or whatever. I mean, I'm not against putting pens on papers,
yeah,
um, but as a daily practice, yeah, I've tried it many times, just doesn't work, and so I'm moving on, and I just kind of do it on an as needed basis, like whatever I need to do. So maybe that's you.
yeah, yeah. And then I would say, kind of after that, you choose at least one thing. Choose one thing that you could start to implement more regularly into your life. And, you can choose more than one, but if it feels overwhelming, like, at least just, start with one. Start there, and again, make it practical and sustainable. Because again, I've brought this up many times, but what's the best form of exercise? The exercise that you will do. And so,
Yes.
choosing something that you can actually see yourself doing. And if, it might be even like, okay, I can see myself doing this, it's going to be challenging. That's still better. Because some people, get to that point where they're like, I don't think I can do anything. Well, like, push yourself a little bit. So don't use that as just a cop out. But at the same time, we don't want you to choose the hardest sounding thing that you're going to get frustrated with a day in and then drop to the wayside again. But yeah.
Yeah, that's another tricky aspect, Kelsey, is that it's there are times where we need to give ourselves some grace. Like I said, I do recognize that I am in a particular season of life where doing like a daily morning exercise routine is just not something that I'm willing to do, and I need to be active in other ways and be creative, as you were describing. So in that way, I'm giving myself grace. I'm not just like constantly kicking myself for not being active enough.
Yeah.
That's a form of self care, to give myself that grace.
Yeah.
But then there are other times, yeah, where it's like you do need to push. You do need to make yourself a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I always there's a prayer that I've heard before that was like to comfort the disturb and disturb the comfortable. You know, sometimes we need one, sometimes we need the other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
And by the way, this is bringing to mind, I do have on hand a list of self-care strategies that's like 50 things, but it's actually a good one. Like it's not like a random Pinterest live, laugh, love kind of thing. It's like actual, you know what I'm talking
Yes,
about. It's like,
100%. Yep.
okay, another list of ideas, right? But
Right.
it's actually, and I mean, I'm sure you'll find a few things on there that are like, yeah, that's not realistic, but most of it is actually good. I'm a big believer. I've shared it with clients before and gotten good feedback. So we can link to that in the notes.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Uh, well, I want to talk, as we alluded to toward the beginning, about when can self-care be a negative thing? When can it be actually harmful? And this might seem like an awkward question because I think that in our society, self-care has become like, okay, the more the better. Like we need more self-care. And so to talk about in any kind of negative way is like, what are you talking about? So let me explain. There's a few ways that it can be dangerous or negative. Some people start using the concept of self-care to avoid actual treatment of issues. Kelsey, do you want to speak to this for a second?
Yeah, sure. I think this ties in a lot with our like coping versus treating, where it's like, well, okay, like I don't actually want to deal with my problems, and so I'm just going to continue to do things that I enjoy, but are still kind of avoiding the problem. And, that becomes my therapy. Like people will say like, oh, well, playing golf is my therapy. Well, like
Mhm.
golf can be self-care, but at the same time, when you're playing so much golf so that you aren't actually facing some of your real issues, then I think it can become a little bit of a problem.
Or like doom scrolling on social media, your social media poison of your choice. It's like I'm just going to allow myself this moment to just zone out and scroll through social media.
Yeah,
Okay, how many times has that actually helped you feel better? Honestly,
exactly.
that's another example.
I think too, like we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but like when you're like, okay, my self-care is laying on the couch and not ever showering.
Yeah,
Well, that becomes just you're putting a self-care label on whatever it is that you want to do and avoid the thing that you should be doing but that you don't want to do and saying,
yeah.
well, I'm not going to do it because of self-care. So sometimes we can be a little bit too apply that label a little bit too liberally and actually just use it to, like we said, kind of almost not even just self-indulgence but just like avoidance. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and that's really honestly, I think maybe the biggest reason why we're even doing this episode is because the term self care has become, as I said, really kind of diluted. Like
Hmm.
it's used for all different kinds of things, and so unfortunately, we need to slow down and ask, what is self care actually?
Yeah.
What does this mean in a healthy way? So I hope that you'll take that from this episode. Another example of how self care as a term can be negative is I remember in my previous job, and I think that this is emblematic of a lot of jobs, especially in larger companies with lots of branches and lots of employees, is during the pandemic, as we were saying earlier, the term self care was thrown around a lot, but it was coming from people way up on the corporate ladder who were just like, throwing a bunch of extra work at us and then reminding us to take care of ourselves, right? Or it's like I've seen examples online of like companies that they pay extremely low wages for the kind of work that the employees have to do, but then they also offer them budgeting classes, right? It's like no, this is like the worst kind of addressing the symptom and not the problem. And so
Yeah.
not to say that work is bad or that large companies are bad, certainly not the company that I worked for, but we do need to kind of have our guard up when it comes to, especially I think, the work world, when the people who are giving me, like, who are determining my job description are emphasizing self-care, I have my guard up. It's like, okay, is this a fox in
Mhm.
sheep's clothing in this moment here? Um, so sometimes I think, to Kelsey's point, self-care can be kind of like a very shallow addressing the symptom, but really, if we could address the problem, if I could rearrange
Yeah.
my workflow, or if I could ask my boss for a raise so that I am getting paid more reasonably for the work I'm doing or something like that, then I wouldn't keep getting burned out. I wouldn't have to keep implementing self-care like you're telling me to do. So that's kind of a tricky thing, but I think valuable. When we talked about this episode, Kelsey, I wrote something a while back about self-care that I think expresses pretty well this concept of how it can be negative, how it can be dangerous, and I took my time writing it, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it instead of trying to rephrase it all. I'll probably skip or leave out a couple parts just for the sake of time, but here's what I wrote. It's believe it or not, I am not 100% all in with the concepts of buzzwords like self-care and boundaries. Do I think most of us can use a lot more of these things in our lives than we currently have? Absolutely. But I also think that there's such a thing as a focus on them to a degree that is unhealthy and that is frankly selfish in ways that are toxic or to our personal and larger communities. So this is a very subtle and complicated issue that I find difficult to describe. But I need to emphasize that 80 to 90% of the US population totally need more self-care and more healthy boundaries in their lives. So know that that probably includes you listening to this. And I'm far from anti-boundaries or anti-self-care. But I have noticed that, at least in the mental health fields, these concepts are discussed as if there's no such thing as too much. I've heard people tell stories of telling people no or cutting others out of their lives in certain situations that give me a deep pause of reflection on whether it's possible that some of us think that just because we're doing something for ourselves, it's automatically justifiable or is even good for us, even though we're doing it with the point of it being good for us. So what many people, and this is frankly more true for most European Americans than anyone due to our cultural norms of individualism, what many people fail to take into account is the importance of our communities, our families, friends, and other groups. We have a tendency to be overly individualized. As important as boundaries and self-care are, it is possible to take them to such an extreme that we find ourselves not only isolated from the people who we used to care about, but having difficulty forging new connections because others aren't living up to our self-focused expectations. Some people seem to have the attitude of, if you ask anything of me, if you ever expect me to inconvenience myself for you, if you ever want me to give to you in ways that take from me, there is no place for you in my life. And this may sound like kind of a straw man argument, but, and I'll emphasize that most people have no problem with taking their attitude to this extreme, but I have seen it on a number of occasions. And I honestly think that sometimes people who purport to be advocates of mental health are more likely than others to be guilty of this attitude. The reality is that if we want to have a healthy social life with healthy relationships, and I believe that we should, since we're fundamentally social beings, even if we're introverts, we're going to have to give of ourselves sometimes. We're going to need to sacrifice, to go the extra mile, to show love to people, honestly. So the point is that anything can be taken to an extreme, and boundaries and self-care are no exception. And then I go on to talk about how much our motives do matter and how to kind of distinguish between what is self-care and what is kind of an unhealthy self-focus, as we've been discussing in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to emphasize. I think really what a lot of it comes down to is kind of having a healthy balance. Because sometimes we can get to the point where we are just concerned about ourselves and all we care about is what's best for me. And if anybody asks anything of me, then they are toxic and we get rid of them out of our lives. Mm-hmm. But then there, like we talked about, there are some people who think of themselves so little that it's just like you said, it's almost like they're a little bit exhausting to be around because they, are trying so hard to, that it's, we can kind of get out of whack either way. Mm-hmm. And like, it's important to understand that your needs do matter. That is true. But also sometimes other people's needs do come first. Both of those things are true. And so what it comes down to is like your self-care is trying to kind of restore that balance. And I think as part of it, just as humans in general, we prefer to find one way or the other. Those places where it's kind of going to be somewhere in the middle, you have to figure out the balance where it's not always going to be the same. Those are tricky to figure out. So we prefer one way or the other. But that's another thing that I think sometimes practicing self-care in a healthy way and actually, kind of taking inventory of your different needs and understanding that balance. It's also learning discernment of understanding, okay, right now my needs need to come first, or right now somebody else's needs need to come first, but I need to make sure that later on I'm still taking care of myself so that I'm in a place where other people's needs can come first and I'm not going to then get into resentment. And yeah, like you said, a lot of times when we're like, well, this person is is taking a lot from me. They're taking more from me than what they're giving me, especially
Mhm.
right now. And we're like, so I need to get rid of them. They're toxic. Get them out of my
Right.
life. And I'm like, listen, that was me sometimes. Like when I was in
Yes.
my worst mental health place, I needed some people who were willing to give me more than what I could give back in that moment.
Mhm.
But because those people were willing to do that and were able to do it from a place of grace and understanding, I am now able to be a person who can give again. Whereas, like, sometimes, and I think toxic is another word that we like to throw out there a lot of,
Yeah.
like, yes, like anybody who is not meeting me 50-50 exactly, like, get out of my life. And that's dangerous
Yeah.
too. We all
Or
need, yeah.
another one I've heard is like I'm surrounded by narcissists. It's like, no, you're not. Come on, they're not all narcissists.
Right. Exactly. And so, like I said, it kind of comes back to balance and discernment. And so, like keeping those things in mind as you're approaching self-care. Your needs do matter, but sometimes other people's needs do come first, and
Yeah.
figuring out what that looks like.
This speaks to a larger discussion. Yeah, discernment and nuance. I mean, we like simple. We like certainty.
Yeah.
We like black and white dualistic thinking. That's the human condition. And I wish that I could wave a magic wand and make it so that we could all just feel a little more comfortable saying, it depends, or
Yep.
sometimes, or I don't know. uh,
Yeah.
because like sometimes this is good, sometimes it's bad. We have to be honest about that. And it's not so cut and dry. But if we want to live truly mentally, socially, spiritually, physically, emotionally healthy lives, we need to, kind of hold things with open hands and be flexible and not try to apply a dualistic all or nothing approach to really any area of our lives. And that's
Yep.
hard, but the results are worth it.
Yep. Absolutely.
So to, as they say, piggyback off of one of the things that Kelsey brought up earlier, I really love that concept of taking inventory of your well-being. And so this is one of those things where I'm going to add something to your to-do list, but it is also something that pays you back in spades and doesn't have to take half a day to do it. You can do it for 5, 10, 15 minutes, I would say probably at most. So how often do you take inventory of your well-being? Probably for a lot of people out there, it's like, I've never really sat down and done that. Or for other people, it's like, I've done something like that, but it's been a long time. So ask yourself that question. And then would you put in your calendar or whatever system works for you to actually make it happen to take 5 minutes or so at the start of each month or each season, or maybe somebody out there wants to do it 5 minutes the first day of the week. That can work well too. Or, a good 15, 30 minutes, as Kelsey said, seasonally every 3 months. But to actually put this practice, this basic reflection practice in your life in a way that works for you. Because again, it's valuable. It's only going to help you.
Yep. Yep. So you can always find us on Facebook at facebook.com/emh.nsc. You can find us on Instagram at embrace.mental.health. You can also send us an email at embracementalhealthnsc@gmail.com. We've got some fun stuff coming up. I've heard some rumors that some merch might be on the way, so you certainly don't want to miss that. And you can kind of hear more about that from our socials. And then also, that's a great way for us to get some feedback and also, answer real questions that you have. We do have our final episode for this season will be coming up towards the end of May, so we want to collect some questions, make sure we can answer questions that you have. And like we said, we've always wanted this to be kind of a community feel and a back and forth. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely value that.
Let me use this episode as an example. It is a nuanced, kind of tricky discussion, and that's kind of the point. It is a little bit more gray than a lot of people make it out to be. And so if we said something that doesn't quite make sense or that you want us to flesh out more, let us know. And maybe we'll reply to you right there on social media. Maybe in a future episode, we'll say, hey, somebody asked a great question about a past episode. We want to address that first. Or we'll bring it into like a listener questions episode or something like that. So hit us up.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week. Hope you have a good week.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks. Bye.